Good morning. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the 22nd edition of World Sustainable Development Summit. I am the MC of this session, and my name is Arpita Pandey. This session is on critical minerals and materials, managing supply chain constraint. The session will be moderated by Mr. Ajay Shankar, sir. He is a distinguished fellow at the TERI, and we are very happy to have a very distinguished line of speakers. Without delaying in this thematic track, we will deliberate upon the existing supply chain constraint for India, the security issue it presents, and how geopolitical blocs such as G20 can help stabilize the segment's volatility. In order to further understand the dynamics related to the topic, we have a line of speakers, and there will be a panel discussion ahead. Without further delay, would like to invite Dr. Siddarthan Balasubramania, Principal Strategist at Climate Works Foundation, to set the context for the discussion.
Good morning, all of you. Thanks to TERI for conferring me doctorate, which is a surprise. I'm not a doctor, just an engineer.
Sorry, sir.
No problem, no problem. I'm happy. So that's a good note to begin with. Thank you. My name is Siddarthan. I work in the Climate Works Foundation, a philanthropic foundation based out of San Francisco, California. But we have deep roots and connection with the work in India, including setting up Shakti Foundation, here, which all of you may know it. And we are part of a whole ecosystem of foundations working with the goal to deepen support philanthropic engagement and funding to India. Let me begin with thanking Team TERI, particularly Karthike and his colleagues in TERI, and my colleague Kanchi, who is right here, for forging a very interesting partnership to pull in this session, because a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of outreach to get the great speakers lined up here. So first, my thanks and appreciation to the team and my colleague Kanchi first. And a warm welcome to all the speakers, pretty distinguished ones. And I'm going to learn a lot because I'm not a mineral expert at all, and certainly not good at reading periodic table as well. So I'm going to learn, as I say, a few things from my end. While I am not a technical mining and mineral expert, what I know is batteries, the permanent magnets used in those components of EV, or the minerals used in photovoltaic cells, or the advanced battery, all need rare minerals and metals. That I know. And when I say this, then I compare it with the India's laudable, ambitious climate goal in terms of the renewable energy capacity or the electrification of transportation goal, and recently advanced battery storage, all the goals which directly support energy security and climate agenda. I would imagine they assume a seamless supply of these material and minerals. But in reality, it may not be so, because of late we encounter some challenges. And in this context, let's remember India is the third largest light vehicle manufacturer in the world. And very likely the way EV is taken off, they may be very strong, significant exporter of two-wheelers, electric two-wheelers. So it became a very important issue for us. But the key question is, are we prepared to face potential disruption to the supply chains because of the volatile geopolitical situation, or the concentration of processing capacity and facilities in few countries, which makes things a bit uneasy if things go wrong? Are we prepared for it? My sense is maybe not at this point of time. But having said the challenge will be there, what I can also figure it out, as we search for more minerals with active effort, it's a likelihood we will discover more, like it happened in Jammu and Kashmir. It's a game changer for India potentially. And when more countries do it, very likely we will find minerals. So what I want to say in the first key message from my side is, while there is a risk of the supply disruptions, it should not be a distraction to the climate goals we set ourselves, because the direction is set. So that need to happen. That's first message for me. So what need to do, given the circumstance, what we can do? There are a few things I list out, and I'll keep to my 5 minutes for a second, don't worry. First, at the global level, as a host of the G20, as a chair of the G20 and the host of the Clean Energy Ministerial, India is very well positioned to be the voice of the global South, to flag the resource security, critical mineral security as an important issue, and also lead the way to find a way. That's the first one we could do. In this context, we can also, India could lead to develop a global cooperative framework. Right? I think somebody said in the plenary, not to create competition and conflict between the countries, how do we can work together? Because the goal about net zero and transition is not just about India, the whole world need to move, then conflict will not help, particularly on the mineral side. That's the second thing. How do we develop a global cooperative framework? Third one, we have to enhance and diversify the processing capacity and capabilities, which is complex because given the process chemistry involved in terms of digging out, separation out, high precision equipment processing, it's very challenging, but our country, India, has the capacity. Again, we can be helpful to the global South as well. But all these also mean very strong domestic policy would facilitate all this, what I just laid out. So let's work on that. I'll wrap up with the last 2 points. So the second important message for me, so laying out all this is all the excitement of new discoveries of the metals and minerals cannot undermine or subservient to keep the people's welfare, the communities around it as a secondary, as it happened. Not deliberate, it happened. So just transition in this case, it cannot be a de facto, post facto consideration, but a prerequisite as we get on exploring these important minerals. From the philanthropy perspective, not just me, there are other foundation partners are around. They are part of this. Shakti is doing a parallel session. Otherwise, the whole team should be here. There's a connected session on zero emission truck where we collaborate very closely happening. From the side, we do few things. I list out and stop. We have partners such as Amrita, a career, and quite a few other partners are looking at reuse, recycle in terms of circular economy vis-a-vis battery. We have a dedicated initiative, flourishing initiative on battery sustainability. And we are also in the process of establishing a partnership with the University of California, Davis, represented here by Swati, sitting right there, where we are going to explore an interesting idea where India could be the face of global South in the G20 context on this subject, more from Swati. And this session itself is also the first step with TERI and quite a few partners to flag the issue as a priority for us. So once again, thank you all of you to be here for your time and look forward to your session as well as learning. Over to Dr. Mr. Shankar.
Yes, sir. No, sir, you can just take it. No, sir. No, sir. Yes, sir. She is already.
So, Amrita, may I request you for your comments from Paris?
Yes, of course. Let me just take a
can
second to share my. Can you hear me?
Something to the unmute. Just wait a minute. I think we'll need to wait for you to get unmuted. Yeah, I think we can hear you now.
Perfect. So good morning, and I will just take 1 second.
And I hope it's not too early in the morning for you.
Well, it's 7. Yeah. So I'll just take 1 second to share my screen. So I hope everyone can see my screen now. So good morning to everyone, and many thanks to Mr. Balasubramaniam for his opening remarks. I'm Amrita Dasgupta. I'm one of the analysts leading the work on critical minerals at the International Energy Agency in Paris. Over the next few minutes, I'll just take you through the key findings of our special report on the role of critical minerals in clean energy transitions that we published in early 2021, as well as all the work on the topic that we have been doing since then. This will provide more of a global perspective, which then I look forward to hearing more about the national perspective from the experts sitting at the table. So jumping right in, today with around 80% of the global GDP and emissions being covered by net zero pledges, the world will need a lot more electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, electricity transmission and distribution lines. This obviously implies that there will be a lot more demand for the minerals and metals that go into these technologies. For example, lithium, nickel, cobalt, manganese, and graphite, which are crucial to battery performance, longevity, and energy density. Then there's rare earth elements that are required for permanent magnets, which are used in wind turbines, as well as EV motors. The sheer size of the future solar markets that's anticipated also means that there will be plenty of additional demand for silicon, silver, and copper. And finally, the expansion of electricity grids for the infrastructure of a cleaner and more electrified system will need a huge amount of copper and aluminium. So many of the technologies that we need for a clean energy future will require significantly more minerals than their fossil fuel-based counterparts. For example, a typical electric car requires about 6 times more mineral inputs than a conventional car, and an offshore wind plant requires about 13 times more mineral resources than a similarly sized gas-fired power plant. Over the last 10 years, renewables have started to dominate the investment in power generation, which is excellent news. But on the other hand, we see that the average amount of minerals needed for a new unit of power generation capacity has also increased by 50%. So how fast could the mineral demand actually rise? For our special report on the role of critical minerals, we conducted a detailed assessment of different scenarios and technology evolution pathways. And the short answer is that a concerted effort to reach global climate goals would mean at least a quadrupling of overall mineral requirements for clean energy technologies by 2040. That's the outcome in our sustainable development scenario, which is a scenario consistent with the Paris Agreement. Now, if we want an even faster transition to hit net zero globally by around mid-century, this would require 6 times more mineral inputs in 2040 than today. The main factor behind this increase is the explosive growth in the mineral demand for EVs and battery storage, closely followed by the mineral needs for expanding electricity networks and then the growth of low-carbon power generation. Looking at the results more closely, for some minerals, the growth is much faster than 4 to 6 times. So in a climate-driven scenario, the demand for lithium, for example, in particular, sees very rapid growth. It varies, of course, depending on the precise strength of the climate policies and the technology pathway that we choose. But in a scenario that's compatible with the Paris Agreement, the demand for lithium is more than 40 times higher than today by 2040. This is followed by graphite, cobalt, and nickel at around 20 to 25 times higher than today. There are 2 important consequences of such a demand picture. The first is that it means that the energy sector is becoming a major source of demand for these minerals, which hasn't traditionally been the case. Today, lithium, once again, for example, 10 years ago, demand for lithium for energy-related applications was minimal. Already today, EVs and battery storage have displaced consumer electronics to become the largest consumer of lithium. And if we get on a trajectory that's consistent with the Paris Agreement, then by 2040, 90% of the global lithium supply will go to the energy sector. The second implication relates to the cost structure of producing the clean energy technologies. We all know that technology learning and economies of scale are bringing down the costs of key clean energy technologies. But as this happens, this also means that the raw materials now account for a larger share of the total. Batteries are once again a really good example. They are much cheaper now than they were about 5 years ago, but the raw materials now account for about 50 to 70% of total battery costs. Therefore, higher or more volatile mineral prices, like the ones we are witnessing today, could have a significant effect on the cost and the speed of transforming our energy system. Now, the impact of raw material prices on total costs varies by technology, but the commodity price rallies that we observed in 2021 and early 2022 as well illustrate the possible strains if such trends are sustained over the longer term. For the case of EV batteries, average prices for cathode materials showed a broad-based increase between 2021 and 2022, which was around 20 to 40% for lithium and nickel and about 2/3 for cobalt. This could translate into a 6% increase in the cost of EV batteries, provided that all the other cost elements remain the same. Similar reversals were also observed in cost trends for solar PV and wind turbines, with silicon and steel prices rising in 2021. So what do clean energy transitions mean for mining companies that are looking to supply the energy sector? The implications here are pretty dramatic as well. Today, for example, the revenue from coal production is 10 times larger than the revenue from energy transition minerals. But there will be a rapid reversal of fortunes in a scenario that meets the global climate goals. Combined revenues from energy transition minerals is set to overtake those from coal well before 2040. So there is a strategic opportunity for companies to position themselves in growing sectors at the expense of declining ones. However, this does not mean a smooth transition for employment in these sectors. There are, of course, many countries with significant resources of both coal and critical minerals, but that's not always the case. So there is a huge task for governments and nations to manage the social consequences of change in the energy sector. So if I turn a little more in detail to the supply side of the equation, it's essential to note that the production of many energy transition minerals is more concentrated than those of oil or natural gas. These high levels of geographical concentration are compounded by the complex supply chains, can increase the risks that could arise from geopolitical disruption, trade restrictions, or other developments in major producing countries like the ones we see today. For cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements, the world's top 3 producing nations control well over 3/4 of the global output. In some cases, just a single country is responsible for around half of the worldwide production. The DRC accounts for 70% of global cobalt production, while China is responsible for 60% of global production of rare earth elements. Now, when it comes to processing and refining operations, the level of concentration is even more notable, with China being the decisive player in many of these areas. So this brings me to an important issue of clean energy supply chains. Today, we see a burgeoning amount of project announcements to build new battery gigafactories, factories to produce solar panels and hydrogen electrolyzers. In some cases, like that of solar PV, adding up all the announced projects matches the level of deployment that is required in the IEA's net zero emissions by 2050 scenario. Although the announced pipeline does not necessarily mean that all of these projects will actually be built, as there are lots of obstacles along the way, which includes financing and permitting processes, but this is still a very promising sign. But as you can see, not all parts of the value chain are moving at the same pace. For example, lithium or copper production capacity. Despite a growing number of projects being announced, the project pipeline is still insufficient to meet the required levels of demand in our NZE scenario. So when some parts of the value chain move faster than others, the overall pace of of the energy transition will follow the trajectory of the slow-moving part. This highlights the importance of scaling up the clean energy value chain in a balanced manner, especially focusing on the value chain of critical minerals, where the development of new projects has considerably long lead times. So I'd like to conclude the presentation with 6 key recommendations from the IEA, because as was said at the beginning of this session, we should not let the mineral supply chain be a hindrance to energy transitions. Rather, we should act in advance so that we're able to achieve our global climate goals. So first, early and clear signals from policymakers and governments is critical to give companies the confidence that they need in order to commit to new supply. But security of supply also lies in diversity of supply. In this context, resource-owning governments can support new project developments by reinforcing the national geological surveys, streamlining permitting procedures to shorten lead times, providing financing support to de-risk projects. When we used to talk about energy security before, we used to talk about oil and gas and OPEC, Russia, and the Middle East. While these will still remain important to balance the energy systems, rapid clean energy transitions are bringing new characters into the global stage. So geopolitical concerns do not disappear in a renewables-rich electrified energy system, and thus adequate and timely investment in critical minerals is needed to ensure access to diverse sources of supply. But a comprehensive approach cannot focus just on supply. It's also vital for governments to step up support for technology innovation, which can alleviate strains on supply by reducing the mineral intensities, as well as opening up possibilities for mineral substitution. To give just one example, about 40 to 50% reductions in the use of silver and silicon in solar cells over the past decade have been critical to enable the spectacular rise that we see today in solar PV deployment. Now, the third area is set to become much more important in the future, and this is recycling. Recycling is well established for some bulk metals like steel, aluminum, and copper, but this is not yet the case at all for lithium and rare earth elements. This will have to change, as, for example, the amount of spent EV batteries reaching the end of their first life surges after 2030. It is important to note that recycling these volumes will not eliminate the need for continued investment in new supplies and in mining, but we do estimate that by 2040, recycled amounts of copper, lithium, nickel, and cobalt from spent batteries could reduce the combined primary supply requirements for these minerals by around 10%. A fourth area encompasses the need for an increase in the resilience of supply chains and to improve market transparency. Regular market assessments, good data, and periodic stress tests can help policymakers and governments to identify possible weak points, evaluate the potential impacts, and then devise the necessary responses. The world also needs to step up efforts to tackle the environmental and social impacts of mineral developments, including the emissions, local pollution, the treatment of worker safety and welfare, because solutions to climate change cannot work on the back of injustices or poor environmental performance further up the value chain. For example, today, majority of the mineral production comes from regions with either low governance scores or high emissions intensity. That's not very great news. This will have to change in order for the supply of minerals to come from responsibly sourced processes. And finally, an overarching international framework for dialogue and policy coordination, which was just mentioned a few minutes ago as well, among producers and consumers can play an extremely vital role. And the IEA believes that holding the G20 presidency this year, India can indeed play a very key role to build such a forum for dialogue and for international collaboration. So with this, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to listening to the presentations by other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you for that very, very succinct and valuable presentation. It sets the global perspective, I think, in a very clear manner. And I'm so glad the IEA is now shifting to this area of work, because the traditional fossil fuel industry will disappear and your work will become center stage as we move along. Now that the stage has been well set for the discussion, may I request Dr. Amrita Goldar for her comments? Could we do that? Amrita, are you there for this discussion?
Yes, I can stay for a while, yeah.
Amrita, thanks a lot for that amazing presentation and quite beautifully put and good recommendations. I just had one question on one of your slides where you pointed out that recycling of critical metals can fulfill 10% of the future demand of these metals. Why such a low percentage from recycling was my question.
It's about 10%, and I don't believe 10% is that low a level, and this is by 2030. So it will be in regions where there has been the largest deployment of EVs. For example, they have to take the lead, so it will be more Europe and China. And then in the progressing years as well, it will be other countries where EV deployment started a little bit later. So it's 10% by 2030.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was unable to hear.
Yeah, I said there's novelty to the fact that I am the second Amrita speaking in a session. So this is the first time for me. But thanks, Amrita, for the presentation. So I will sort of take off from what Amrita talked about as point 3, which is sort of encouraging recycling, as she's also talked about diversifying supply source. So we, or at least ICRIA's work, is lending support to this argument and building a case for recycling, specifically in the Indian context. So in the interest of time, and Amrita has already covered a lot of points, I will skip through some of the content that you see here. But one point that I wanted to highlight is what is CRM for different countries differs. So it is not so, even though from the IEA paradigm, she has listed out on some metals, which will be common to what India also deems as critical. But the fact remains that it will be different. So it's sort of trying to move a moving target is what I believe. So how you define CRMs, or at least how we define in our research to be CRMs, is based on how the domestic endowments are, what sort of geopolitical risks are assigned to supplying or receiving supply from international partners, substitutability potential, and recyclability. And for our research, these are the following raw materials that we are deeming as critical. This, I think we can skip because Amrita has already talked about it, the fact that supply is very highly concentrated in few regions and few countries. So there are obviously a lot of risks as far as sourcing it from other countries is concerned. But let's sort of zoom in into the Indian context here. So what do we have in terms of resource endowment? And I think Dr. Chadha will also be talking about this in much detail. So we don't have any domestic production of cobalt and nickel. So these days, there's been a lot of news about the new lithium fan that even Siddarthan talked about. So these are sort of opening up, and these are the new resources that India could sort of base its strategy on. But I would argue that recycling might be a more surer option. This is in terms of international trade in CRM. So we have tried to map international export and import patterns for some critical raw materials. So as you can see, is largely, at least current trade is mostly aligned with manganese and copper. But as the technology evolves, you have the market deepening for EVs, etc. You would see more and more imports happening for other materials also. So lithium, nickel, cobalt, etc. Now there is, and I think Siddarthan in his opening remarks also talked about it, we are viewing this from more the EV side. So the point is there is a lot of impetus right now given to EVs. So there are, you have PLI schemes which advocate or at least encourage advanced cell chemistry, advanced battery production in India. There are other sort of policy thrusts given in terms of FAME2, etc., which all seem to drive the EV agenda. And there are, if policy is to be believed, even though the larger policy frame remains technology agnostic, but how the market is sort of going to play out, at least till 2030, we believe that the market would be dominated by battery chemistries of NMC. and there will be followed by LFP and LCO. So determined by battery chemistries, you would also have your import and resource requirements. Now, talking about recycling as an agenda, and Amrita before me has already put this point, but in addition to this raw material supply chain and having security to that, there are interlinkages with respect to entrepreneurship and employment also that we need to take cognizance of. So this is something that I'm going to talk about in subsequent slides. So let's talk about this first. And this is something that we did as part of a CWF supported study. We looked into battery waste recycling in India, the sort of lay of the land, and what are the current challenges recyclers are facing. So as you may be aware, lithium ion batteries are sort of the market for recycling is very, very small. So it is growing as there is greater diffusion technology penetration. It is going to grow in the future, no doubt about it. But right now it's a very small set. So we tried to investigate about who would be sort of occupying this space that is needed for recycling. Would it be the current lead acid manufacturing guys? Would there be startups who would be coming in? Now, most of the startups you would notice are coming in the automobile components or in the automobile manufacturing space. Very few players in the startup sort of environment are coming in for battery recycling. So what are the sort of challenges that we need to solve for this sort of nascent industries to grow in India? There are problems with respect to collection of waste, transportation, the costs, technology and investment challenges. So this is upfront investment as well as skilling of workers. So what we did as part of the study is we surveyed 3 states in India. So you see them highlighted on the left. So which included Karnataka, Maharashtra, and Haryana. And we talked to recycling different entrepreneurs in the recycling space, PROs, OEMs, to find out what is the deal here, what is happening. So these are some of the results that we found. So the upfront investment, as we find, is very high for lithium-ion battery recycling. So for many small-scale lead-acid battery workers, it is beyond their sort of capabilities to invest. The technology is right now pretty complex. So don't get me wrong, the best in the field are actually having very high recovery rates. So people that we interviewed, some of them talked about cobalt and lithium recovery rates of greater than 95%. In some cases, it was even greater than 99%. But still, it is for a small set. It is not the majority. Further, we talked about what sort of stops them from moving into the lithium-ion battery space. So they talked about the fact that there is a very small scale, obviously, which makes profitability difficult. But upon asked about what would make profitability higher, so right now, there is some extent of profitability in recycling, but to make margins higher, they said transportation cost is a major barrier. So currently, collection and transportation costs represent about 40% of total recycling costs, which is astonishing. And spent batteries, at least as far as our survey concerned, are traveled on an average of 800 kilometers, which is crazy. So so recyclers in Haryana are sourcing their batteries from Karnataka. This is something that needs greater optimization. And I feel this needs greater policy support so that we have localized recycling supply infrastructure so that the recycling can happen at a local level. So let's look at policies and regulations. So there are indeed, so don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to criticize the current policy environment. There are a lot of policies that are in place. So battery waste management rules, you have the e-waste management rules, and they set out guidelines with respect to what is the target for waste collected and managed. And they using, or at least from the extended producer responsibility angle, give the onus of recycling to the manufacturers to deal with efficient management of batteries. However, upon asked, the recyclers themselves felt that there were a lot of gaps. So even though there is policy, at the operational level, they felt that there were a lot of gaps with respect to incentives given, with respect to technology handholding, with respect to skill availability, etc. So this they felt was a glaring gap. And to bridge this gap, if we indeed want to move to a 12% paradigm, if at all, in the Indian case, much more needs to be done. This is, I think, an interesting point that I want to highlight here. We also looked at the employment side of things. So Amrita before me talked about, or at least alluded to, the just transition angle when she talked about workers in the mining space, in the coal space, in the critical raw material space. But this is a, I would say, lesser heard of story, where if you look at the data, and I would want to draw your attention to the primary data analysis that we did, you would see that 53.3% of all recycling industries employ just 11 to 30 workers. So these are not gigafactories that we're talking about. In the larger scale, these are small operating, the smaller scale units that are doing the recycling in India. And if you look at the skill level also, these are somewhere in the medium skill level. So these are people who have just passed schooling in terms of the majority. So when we talk about a transition that will happen, if you're moving away even in the recycling space, because these gigafactories will give you the efficiency that you need to increase the rate. So from 12, if you want to move on to, I don't know, 25%, I don't even know if it's that technologically possible, but to move to that sense, how do you carry the informal sector along? Is this new idea that I want to present to the audience, so which will have a lot of merit going forward. Now coming to the other point, and again, Siddarthan talked about it, is this G20 angle. So what can G20 do? So G20, as far as legacy of issues is concerned, has talked about it. So from its early days of talking about resource security from the fossil fuel sense, now talking about resource security from the critical mineral space, has been advocating diversification of sources, circular economy is also very much within the realm of things. But I feel that more, I would say, as much as I read the issue notes and I read the communiques, most of it seems to be promising things rather than actually having implementation on the ground. So can we have more ambition coming from the G20 agenda towards recycling to recover critical raw materials is what I ask for. If I compare the G20 countries, and this is sort of a timeline, you would also see in sort of running parallel to the interest of G20 in critical raw materials, you would also see many of these countries coming up with raw material policies of their own. So they have, I would say, much more ambitious ask. So if India, as part of its policy, is asking for, say, 100% of collection and management, you have much more stringent asks. So for example, if you look at EU, so it is setting up targets of using refined lithium, which is recovered within their regions, and using that for their battery production. IRA, it is talking about investment tax credit for recycling projects. So can we think about more ambition as far as recycling is concerned? Because people know that it is going to be a problem of the future. And this is, I would say, a low-hanging fruit if raw material sourcing needs to be done. So in fact, a few days back, I was reading a newspaper article which was talking about how made in India now needs to be shifted to remade in India. So if I could propose that idea to this audience about how recycling needs to be advocated, not just in India, but looking at it from the G20 lens, is something I would want to propose. Thank you very much.
There would be questions. I also have some, but I think we'll go through the full panel discussion before we come to you for questions. That's all right.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Siddarthan. Thank you to to the speakers who came before me. This has been a very interesting session. So Amrita, the first Amrita, spoke about critical minerals from a global supply chain perspective. The second Amrita spoke about it from a recycling perspective. What I'm going to talk about is electric vehicles, where the bulk of the battery demand which requires critical minerals will be needed as we transition. So just one second. Sorry. Can I get some? To take a few minutes to introduce the India ZEV Center at UC Davis. UC Davis has been a premier center for sustainable transportation since 1991. We were selected by the US Department of Transport as the National Center for Sustainable Transportation. Over the past 30 years, we've helped facilitate zero emission vehicle cooperation in many countries across the world. There are different regional centers within ITS that do deep dives on countries. So for example, the China Center has been instrumental in developing policies related to sustainable transportation in the last decade. ITS recently launched the India and the European centers. The India Center was launched at the Clean Energy Ministerial in Pittsburgh last year with the objective of building a zero emission vehicle policy program for India and Indian states. Very quickly, we aim to achieve this through designing policy, regulations, institutions, governance, finance, strategic cooperation at both national and subnational level. So this data is taken from CM. India is one of the largest automobile producers with approximately 22 million vehicles manufactured during the financial year 2022. Globally, the country is the fourth largest producer of commercial and passenger vehicles after China, US, and Japan. Two-wheeler vehicles account for the largest share of the automobile industry with close to 77% market share as of 2022. The automobile sector contributes 1/3 to the manufacturing GDP, and hence it's a key driver of economic growth in the country. India is also a major exporter of vehicles and auto components. Among vehicles, the major export segments include passenger vehicles, commercial vehicles, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and quadricycles. According to SIAM, commercial vehicle exports had grown the largest last year. What is going to be the impact of this transition on electric vehicles? So this is what we did. As of 2022, India had around 2 million electric vehicles, the sale of 2 million electric vehicles, less than 1% of over 291 vehicles, which is used countrywide. So putting that together, we mapped EV policies, both draft and notified, in 25 states and 4 union territories. This analysis basically showed that if one were to assume that these targets are going to be met by 2030, a lot of these policies are, by the way, aimed at 2030. If these policies are going to be met by 2030, the chart that you see on your right, that is going to be the extent of which electric vehicles grow within the larger vehicle segment in the country. Even if these targets are not met, and if we go by IEA projections, EV sales across all modes, including 2 and 3 wheelers in India, will be about 30% in 2030 in the stated policy scenario. By if we consider a more ambitious scenario, it increases to 47% by 2030, and by 2050, nearly 85 to 95% of all new vehicles sold are EVs. in 2050. This has an impact on battery requirement and minerals required for the batteries. This points to a dramatic increase in battery demand, and this is just from electric vehicles. Securing supply chains for clean energy transition has received increasing focus in the last few years, as both our earlier speakers have spoken about. Several countries, US, EU, UK, Norway, Japan, have notified a critical mineral list. Securing critical material supplies for automotive and other battery supplies is also taking place through the development of strategic alliance. A key example is the Sustainable Critical Minerals Alliance between US, Canada, France, UK, Germany, Australia, and Japan. Another major example is evident in the conditionality that includes domestic in manufacturing and friend-shoring of material supplies that we see in the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed in the US last year. Batteries used in EVs and grid storage account for most use of critical minerals. In EVs, critical minerals used critical minerals used in lithium-ion batteries are the dominant type of rechargeable batteries. 74% today of the global end use for lithium goes into batteries. Given India's clean energy ambitions on the power side and on electric vehicles, we need to start thinking about a critical mineral strategy for us. And this is why we need to start thinking about it. Almost $10 billion, as a couple of slides before showed, India earns in terms of export revenues. Our analysis shows, this is the chart on the left, where what we did was we looked at some G20 countries. We put together exporters, the countries that we export to, whether they have cell manufacturing capacities, whether they have battery manufacturing capacities, and whether they have critical mineral availability. Then we also classified them as whether they are G20 members, both G20 and Global South, neither G20 nor Global South. And that is the chart on the left, and the chart on the right was the earlier thing. What this tells you is 85% of India's automotive trade spans 59 countries with 68% of trading partners in the Global South. Brazil, Indonesia, South Africa, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia are both Global South and G20 countries. Other key G20 trading partners include US, Mexico, Canada in North America, France, Germany, Italy, UK in Europe, Australia, Japan in the East. 33 of the 59 countries that are India's automotive export partners already have some sort of EV ambition or target set in the 2030 to 35 period, either as part of their UNFCCC NDC submission or their national climate policies. As key countries among India's automotive partners transition towards their EV targets and ambitions by 2030-35, we will have to start thinking of how to manufacture and export EVs that are competitive on both price and technology. This necessitates investments in domestic supply chain. The JNK find, well, I'm not a geologist, but I'm just saying it sends a really good signal. I don't know how much of that, because it's inferred resources, I don't know how much of that is actually extractable, but it still sends a positive message to the entire manufacturing community. Now, what we also ended up finding was that 20 countries that are key competitors to India's automotive exports across the same three segments, PV, commercial vehicles, and two-wheelers, account for about half of India's automotive exports. Amongst these, Japan, North America, and Europe have both cell and EV manufacturing, in addition to being strong competitors for Indian exports. So what do we do about this? One thing is, in G20, a lot of this is already being discussed in the ETWG discussions, as we all know. It is a priority for the government of India to consider how we can secure supply chains for our domestic manufacturing. The PLI schemes that were alluded to earlier point to one such direction. But from a trade perspective, we are not yet part of any major groups. That there have been groupings amongst international amongst other countries, both in the particularly OECD countries, and we are not part of any group. So this presents us with an opportunity to use some of our trade relations and build together an alliance with countries that are not part of this or may be part of this, but with whom we have very old relations. For example, Indonesia has a lot of nickel. India exports two-wheelers and three-wheelers to Indonesia. Can we form a strategic advantage or an alliance through our trade agreements, through bilateral agreements with Indonesia? Similarly, with Brazil, we have old relations with Brazil. We are part of the BRICS. Can we start thinking in that direction? What this does is from a geopolitical perspective, it helps safeguard some of our concerns, or at least starts trying to mitigate some of our concerns. From a domestic perspective, it sends a positive signal to the industry that we are working from to secure supply chains for domestic manufacturing. All of this, of course, has to be underpinned by very strong domestic policy. I know India does not have an EV sales, EV target, a zero emission vehicle target, but individual segments, the previous analysis that mapped states also has individual segments. There are many states in India today where in the last year, 2 and 3 e-wheelers were about 85% of their vehicle sales in that year. Assam was one such state. Chandigarh is the next state. Delhi has a very progressive EV policy. But this now needs to be replicated on the manufacturing side of things. We need strong policies to underpin our supply chains, without which we will lose our competitive advantage in the automobile sector. Thank you.
Okay, that was a very comprehensive perspective on where our EV sector is moving and the challenges it would pose. May I request Dr. Ajay Shankar from CSOP to give us the benefit of this.
Can you please take me to my presentation? My presentation, please. I'm not able to. Mouse is not moving. Maximize that. Mouse is not moving. Thank you very much. Thank you to the organizers for inviting us to this very timely discussion on critical minerals and materials, managing supply chain constraints. So we are very happy to be here, and the work that we are doing at CSEP, Center for Social and Economic Progress. Ganesh Sivamani is also with me here, who has been working on critical minerals and supply chains. Interestingly, some things have already been said, so I'll just connect to two of those. That I spoke at an international non-profit organization called Be Wastewise in October on recycling and urban mines. So if you refer to the Hindustan Times Insights of 14th February, we have an article there, op-ed there, called Mine the Gap. So it's not M-I-N-D, but it is M-I-N-E, Mine the Gap, using urban mines, which means wastes, to extract. So recycling has already been discussed in that context. This is a very recent op-ed. Secondly, we are also participating in writing a policy brief for G20, T20, which hopefully should be done in the middle of this year. We have already started participating in the G20 T20. Incidentally, G20 is just opposite our office. So, but that's not the connection. The connection is that it has been accepted and we are writing that. A bit of background. You see, we have committed to moving to net zero emissions by 2070. And we have been talking about EVs, electrifying trains, storage batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, which all need, let's say, the minerals that have already been discussed, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, etc. One important thing to keep in mind is that whether you are able to actually manufacture all the EVs that have been described, all the trains being electrified that has been discussed, if the batteries are being charged from coal-fired plants, that has to be kept in mind. Therefore, I brought into the discussion, it's very important that solar panels, wind turbines, and how fast we move to clean electricity. So having EVs, charged batteries through coal-fired plants is actually not the full story. So there is a lot more to be done. So what do we do? First step, I think, is assessing the critical. Actually, I'm talking about the title of the paper that I'm presenting is assessing the criticality. Unless we know which minerals are critical, more critical, most critical, or least critical, it's not easy to design a policy by the government on what exactly are the future steps, and have been discussed already. Amrita and Swati. Swati is my former colleague also. So they have discussed already that this is important, that the strategies have to be there. Why I'm saying this is for the following reason, that India would need to think. So I'm moving the context before I make the presentation. India needs to make its choices between short to medium term and long term planning. Because if somebody tells me India is not a part of MSP, mineral security partnership, or alliances, these things can work for maybe 5 years, 10 years, maybe 2030. Then somebody tells me, no, we can have ownership of assets abroad, which Kabil is supposed to be doing. Okay, that also is very interesting. But remember, we are talking of the year when I will not be there, 2070. And it has to be a long-term perspective under preview, rather than India joining certain trading blocks. Very good. I have worked for more than 2 decades on international trade, but it's good to have that. But why I am saying this has the following context, that whenever I talk to a geologist or talk to somebody in the government, or maybe GSI, or I'm told that India's geology is similar to Western Australia, South Africa, and so on and so forth. So imagine that if we had explored our resources well, as is said, this inferred resource, how much of that we will get, and how much of that we'll be able to actually process, because processing is a dirty business. So entire value chain, entire supply chain, and the long-term plans and strategies of the government are important. 3.5 years ago, I established the program of non-fuel minerals and mining in the then Brookings, India, which we changed to 2.5 years ago to Center for Social and Economic Progress. Now, we have devoted our energies to the entire mining sector, because critical minerals are out of the minerals that you're talking about. So we have been working on the economics of mining and minerals in India, which includes exploration issues, auctions issues, royalty issues, normative issues, that whether we are doing good to the societies which get affected by. So this is a big context behind all the work, all the things that we are discussing today. And therefore, I spent my first 4 minutes on that. Let me go to the presentation and the background. Much of this might have been discussed, but I still would like to highlight that critical minerals are essential inputs in the production process of the. Now, I don't have to speak more about it because eminent three speakers have already spoken about it, that these are the future fuels for us, and absolute, not only fuels for us, these are IT, aviation, defense, security. There are many other elements to it. Today, we may be talking about the clean energy, but there are multiple other elements attached to it. Resilient access to critical minerals is required for low carbon technologies in line with India's COP26. So COP26 and further COPs are going to talk about a lot on how India would keep its promises, and we believe that India will keep its promises. So our earlier study, which probably Amrita you quoted in CSEP 2021, we assessed the criticality of 23 minerals because we don't know which are critical. We assessed the criticality of 23 minerals, and that's a uploaded working paper on the CSEP website. And we were very happy to at least say something about how to measure the criticality, even though there is some earlier work to which we are indebted. And that is, if you see on the left-hand side, there are earlier work by Planning Commission 2011, which talked about some strategic 12 minerals. Then Indian Mineral Inventory 2015 talks about some minerals are important for the country. But the most effective study that I'm quoting is the Department of Science and Technology and CEEW. There are two studies from which we have richly borrowed along with the EU methodology, 2014 and 16. Then National Mineral Policy 2019 emphasizes the need to explore critical minerals. And CSEP 2021, as I said, we did for 23 minerals. Major economies, including Australia, EU, USA, they periodically, starting from probably, if I'm not wrong, starting from maybe around 2007-8 onwards, the countries have started paying attention to assessing the criticality of their minerals, both, and it's already been said, both on the demand side and the supply side. And what we have, and the DST CEEW studies borrowed from, is a very robust methodology that EU used in 2017 and later in 2020 also, to which I'll spend a couple of minutes now. Before that, I know that it has been presented earlier. On the left-hand side, you can see, I don't want to take many. I just took cobalt, lithium, and rare earths as an example, or as 3 examples. You can see on the left-hand side is the extraction side. The right-hand side is the processing side. So cobalt, 69% in Congo, but 65% processing in China. And here it's time to stop, ponder over some discussion which we generally don't see in many of the events like this, is that when Ganesh and I started looking at, okay, Congo, 69% extraction, but the study has to be, it's a Peterson Institute study that we looked at, that which are the companies. So it is, and if the companies are present there, where are the headquarters? So this needs even more serious study, that 69% extraction in Congo is a very easy subject to say, but then what are the companies? And we were astonished when we have not yet worked to that granularity, but it is important to know which are the major companies and which are their headquarters, which countries they originate from. So this is one point about cobalt that I mentioned. And lithium, you can see, Australia sends its lithium to China for processing. And rare earths, the story has been told earlier that 60% is extracted in China and 87% is processed in China. So the day China switches off its supply to some country, you can imagine that all the big programs that we are talking about, what happens to that. And it has happened earlier for certain minerals. I'm not going to the details of that. So this is our choice of minerals. We chose our minerals carefully. The pinks are the 2021 edition. They were 23. We have now chosen 43, 20 increased. And there is a reason behind that. We looked at all major countries' critical minerals list. We looked at planning commissions list. We looked at DST, CEW list. So whatever, because the time and energies were limited. So we could pinpoint these are the 43 minerals that we are going to study. And I think you can see the rare earths, interestingly, are with the atomic numbers lanthanum 57 to lutetium 70. I'm not going into the details of this, but these are the minerals we have chosen. And coming to, because I want to give time to discussion, what is the critical mineral assessment methodology? There are two parts to it. The demand part, that is economic importance, and the other one is the supply risks. So the two sides have to be looked at very carefully. These are the indicators that we have used. And I'll quickly go through maybe another few minutes and then I'll stop. First of all, in the demand side is the disruption potential, which means it measures the proportion of manufacturing GVAs which get affected due to non-availability of the mineral. So what we have done is that 5-digit NIC, suppose a mineral is no more available, how much percentage of gross value added of the manufacturing sector would be impacted is called the disruption potential. And we have taken a 3-year average from Annual Survey of Industries. Substitutability. Minerals are scored based on their cost and performance levels of the substitutes. If the substitutes are available, then economic importance may not be as high as it seems to be, because substitutes can douse that. What we have taken is multiplier coefficient. This is what we did with our last study, that it's important to see which sector is getting affected, but those who know input-output tables, there are backward-forward linkages. Some sectors can have high multiplier, and we gave some weight to the multipliers of the particular sectors. But this time we have innovated by a cross-cutting index. Cross-cutting index means copper may not show up very well in the criticality, but copper is cross-cutting. It is used, you talk of anything, whether it is EV or it is the electric supply to my office, or so copper becomes cross-cutting across all sectors. We have given some weight to that. In details are available, which we'll share separately, but one paper is already there. Supply side risks, arises from the concentration of mineral extraction and processing. I've already said that we looked at carefully from the world mining data and EU report, what are the concentration of extraction, what is the concentration of processing. We used Herfindahl-Hirschman index to measure the geographic concentration. Quality of governance in those countries. Congo, for example, is always risky because the governance quality by the World Governance Indicators of World Bank is low. Import reliance of India, recycling that I've just talked about, mind the gap from the urban mines, substitutability. But the blue head, highlight is we have done the bottleneck analysis, which means we looked at extraction is at more risk versus processing is at more risk. So we took the one which was at higher risk in our calculations. This paper will be soon uploaded, but these are the minerals high in both, which means high economic importance as well as high supply risk. There are some minerals which we are finding high supply risk and some minerals which we are finding high economic importance. So the one on the first quadrant are the most critical. And this is a subject of discussion. I'm not going into that detail. Lastly, a couple of minutes on policy implications. Policymakers can use the results to determine mineral-wise strategies. You see, because no one strategy will fit every mineral's response. So every mineral will have to be carefully crafted through a policy, accelerated exploration through incentivizing junior. So that is the missing part in the entire journey of India's mining, that we do not have. The world over, there are huge exploration budgets. We don't have junior explorers, and foreign investment is almost gone out, whatever had come in. Priority allocation of critical mineral blocks is important. And now I am talking, wearing my 2070 hat, that short-term things can be done, but long-term things can only be done. Increased focus on recycling of various, this has been discussed already. And then trade agreements with countries that have large share of extraction and processing, acquisition of foreign mineral assets by Kabil, participation in multilateral fora such as MSP, and imbibing good global practices for recycling, ensuring resilient critical supply. Now, these supply chains, and I can talk about it if there are questions, but thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. That's some really pioneering work that you're doing, and you have great value to everybody, including government. May I request Mr. Purohit now for his comments?
Thank you so much, sir. I see that the time is 12:45 or 12:52. So we've already eaten up into the question answer session and the thanks note. So can I eat into that if you allow me, right? Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. So, sir, I represent the business, the recyclers. We are a recycler. So first I'll tell you where I'm coming from. And when I visit any country outside of India, I tell them that I come with a liability of origin, and my job is to actually change the perception about India's recycling capabilities. So I'll try and do that here too, sir. And we have a presentation. Can you just load it here? But without wasting time on that, you see where we come from is that this company which I represent, and also I'm a president of the Recycling Environment Industries Association of India in Delhi. We are recyclers of metals such as cobalt, nickel, vanadium, tungsten, molybdenum, and now lithium. We have a facility in Gujarat, which is a 14,000, 9,001, and 45,001 certified. And just to tell you, these are our metals of interest, which I'm very happy to note that at least we have brought them to the table and said they are critical, The kind of recycling we do, we have a green recycling complex, which is 55 acres. That's almost 200,000+ square meters. What we do is we follow what is called the power of zero. This facility is a hydrometallurgy facility which recovers all these metals without any waste. And when I say without, means we have zero discard to landfill and we have zero water discharge from the facility. In fact, we are located in an area which is an engineering zone. Third, we are now moving to river water and groundwater. We intend to become zero river water, zero groundwater. We have already created a lake, which is this year is going to do 50%. Water will be supplied by our own rainwater harvesting system. We are looking at zero heat from the process getting wasted. It's all being converted into steam. We have a circular economy CTI score, which is a World Business Council of Sustainable Development's tool to assess circularity. We are at 26%. We are moving to zero coal. In fact, we have just signed off an intent that this year, 30% of our energy will become renewable with a target to go 100% renewable. We are also, with KPMG as our partner, we're looking at how we can become net zero and trying to approach SBTI, which is the Science-Based Target Initiative. And I'm talking of a small recycler out of Gujarat. So when we say that recycling in India is small scale, I think things have changed. The second Amrita somewhere made the comment that, you need more profitability. I don't think we do. With lithium prices and cobalt and the way they're going to go, I don't think a recycler needs profitability support. There are much more things which are required in India. Involving SMEs, I think, that is collection system. That's not recycling. Breaking a battery is not recycling. It's just preparing it for recycling. Recycling is when you can get the metal back into the same chain in a circular manner or into value-added streams. That's recycling. Swati made a very important point about the kind of demand incentives that the country is giving to generate demand, and look at what we are on the critical metal side. So I'll just give you a business perspective. What as a recycler in India I look at, where do we see this recycling going? As I said, we have an existing facility which can actually recycle lithium-ion battery black mass. Unfortunately, it is taking time to get it approved because the battery waste management tool does not even recognize the metal reclaimers as recycler. We look at battery will come in and it'll get recycled, but who's going to take out all the metals, which is 70% of the cost of a battery. And it has lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all three of which India is 100% import dependent. And if you look at the kind of resources we have said we have as a country, we could be talking, 90 million tons of cobalt resource, 48 million tons of nickel reserves, but we have zero production in the country. Nickel, I think we do have a capacity for 2,000 tons a year. You look at graphite, you look at any of these metals. What is an inferred resource versus a proven resource takes $1 billion, and a proven resource usually becomes 10% of the indicated reserve. An economically developed mine is a different thing compared to a resource, and it takes a lot of time. But the government is doing brilliant steps. Our Honorable Prime Minister has talked about Make in India. I love the comment from again, the second Amrita, Remake in India. It was a very nice one. This kind of recycling, you don't need many players. If you look across the globe, every country will have 2 of them. If you look at US, you'll find 2. If you look at Europe, you'll find 2, 3, 4 packs. So you don't have to have a huge number of recyclers, because it's difficult for the Environment Ministry to control them. It's difficult to have the right kind of technology to ensure there is no pollution. And the Honorary Prime Minister gave the slogan for Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is, and it has kind of converged the energies of bureaucracy, the Indian businesses, institutions, academia, research teams. And, there are actions being taken. There are incentives like PLI and specs which have come out, but where is recycling in that? There is no recycling. And we are saying that recycling is required. Let's look at, what this kind of company can do. Now, we are putting up a research center of 100 scientists, which will be specifically working on lithium-ion battery recycling, ensuring that the recycling in India remains chemistry agnostic. You will have sodium ion coming in, you'll have aluminum air coming in. Who's going to recycle those whenever they come? Until such time, if Rubamin can, we have been supplying, we've been doing some of these metals already. We have 30,000 tons of hazardous waste comes in, all metals get recycled, go back to making the catalyst again. And catalyst is a very sensitive application. So 99% is the purity of every metal that we are reclaiming today. And 95% plus is the recoveries, because there is no waste. There's nothing going out of the factory. And this exists in India. So what do we need? That when you talk of incentive, we are unable to categorize recyclers. We don't have recycling as an industry. If I go to somebody who says, oh, you are doing catalyst, you should go to hydrocarbon, or you should go to. So I think one important point is there should be a common place for a recycler of critical metals to go, and they should interact between the departments to see where we should help them. Second, there should be exceptions to the law. We have got OECD to non-OECD, no movement of waste, banned. Can we have exceptions to critical metals? Please have a look at it. WTO envisages some kind of exceptions. I saw in one of the slides. We are talking about import, we are still looking at waste. For critical metals, these are recyclables. These are not wastes. So don't be scared of them. And when you have technology in the country, these are patented technologies. Some of them are proprietary. We'll be looking at how to patent them. Most of the time in India, people are scared of process patents because it's difficult to protect. Let's look at, one part was CPCB and MOEF, very important players. They control the recycling. So they have to look at how to control the black mass which comes out of breaking of a battery, whether it's allowed to be exported. Currently, India is exporting black mass, which contains all the 3 critical elements we've been talking about. And do we want to do that? If we want to, yes. But if you retain it in the country, there are recyclers who can claim all of it. So there are these practical aspects which, as a recycler, I can bring up to the forum. How much time do I have? Just a second. So I'll talk about investments into recycling, because that's one point I can do. We are creating the first 10,000-ton lithium-ion battery equivalent facility in Gujarat under Vibrant Gujarat's project. Also, very supportive of the government to provide us the quick approvals for various things to ensure that this project gets to see the light of the day before June 2024. So by 2024, we'll have a 10,000-ton battery equivalent recycling with 100% zero waste, zero liquid discharge, and recovery of all metals. To ensure that people believe us, I say the liability of origin. I have to convince people in our own system that we can do it. So we are creating a kind of a demonstration plant, which we will show in April 2023. And we have a plant which can do 2,500 tons of recycling of black mass right now, for which we have moved the application to the Central Pollution Control Board. But we are trying to resolve the understanding on the law side. Just correcting one of the points in terms of kind of spends, the pilot plant would cost in India something like $70 million and not 5 or 10. And the major project which is planned will cost something like $300 million and not 20. So when you talk of recycling these elements of battery grade kind of materials with zero waste, zero discharge, renewable energy, zero water, or trying to not use groundwater, you're talking of an advanced level of recycling. It cannot be done by the small sector. But coming to the last point, India evidently has gaps, not just in, we have reserves, but in mining technology or exploration technology. We will have gaps to convert into oxides, from oxides to metals, from metals to compounds or components. Those technologies are very difficult to get, but fortunately, the government has done a lot of partnership. Partnership will be the key for India to solve the problem, and recycling undoubtedly, because I tell you, when we use expensive solvents which are patented outside of India and we import them to ensure that we recycle every kg of the metal, we can invest once in that solvent. But if I cannot recycle that solvent, my business cannot run. So India, which will require maybe $10 billion of bill to import lithium, cobalt, nickel, vanadium for its battery future. And it's not about EV. If you want to have green energy, you need batteries. You cannot do solar without batteries in future because it's just lasts for the daytime. So energy will become green. We'll have to have batteries. And to have that, you will need to foot this bill of $10 billion unless the platforms like Quad, the platforms like, there is SCRI, where India, Japan, Australia, or India, Japan, Australia, US. You don't need to have all minerals here. You go to the person who has the minerals, get the first level of competence, which you may have or not have. If you have it, please, very good. But if you don't have it, partner with. So there's going to be multilateral agreement, tripartite agreements between countries which can take from ore to salts or to metals. India does the metals and components. So those kind of arrangements will have to be worked out. And research. When a company puts in a research like that, this is going to be up in about 2 years' time, maybe 2.5, but it'll be stages. But where is the support? Can we have the bilateral within the country? You have CSIR labs, you've got, so many. Can we talk more with them? Because most of the technologies done in the academia, they cannot be directly employed to commercial. We took 2.5 years of working before we could commercialize one technology we took from one of the institutes. And since then, it's all been in-house. But can we partner better with those institutes to ensure that whatever has been done quickly gets commercialized in this area? So, those are the thoughts. If there's anything more, I can answer the questions. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Now the floor is open for questions. My request would be just ask the question. No comments and no preamble to the question. Come straight to the question. Need not introduce yourself in the interest of time.
Good afternoon. So my question is, whenever there is a mineral extraction process in India, and in the recent past, it has been observed that there has been some amount of backlash by civil society, by activists, and some of the mineral extraction processes haven't been smooth, and they have lingered over the years. How is this government worked, or how has that entire framework changed, and how is mineral extraction easier and safer today? Thank you, sir.
Can we take a few more questions?
Hello. I want to actually build on his question further. So how in mineral extraction do you build the social angle of the informal sector that is clearly like part of this mineral extraction as well? And also, how does G20 play a role in that for securing the supply chains, especially tying up with the informal sector?
I have a question to Mr. Purohit, because he said about the investment, but as far as I know and interacted with the government directly do not want to get involved into investment. They want private players to come in. So considering the huge investment that is necessary for ensuring metal resources, how to go about it? Because it is just impossible from Indian perspective unless private industry is willing to invest into the third country. That will be a big challenge.
Not really. See, it's a good point.
Yeah, I also have a question to Mr. Purohit about the collection. How do you structure the collection? Are you working mainly with industries? I can get up. Or are you also working with household collection? How is that done? Is it done with outsiders? Are you managing all of this? So maybe you can explore a little bit that topic. Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Just a question to Mr. Purohit as well. You talked about the massive potential reserves that India has in terms of copper, nickel, and all of that. But we all know that the high levels of investments go in to ensure that there is enough manufacturing and processing of it, and which I completely agree with every single thing that you said, because it also reminded me that India, in fact, also has the 5th largest reserves for rare earth, which is something that is completely untapped, and it could give, like, the reports say that it could give India like 90,000 crore potential. What should or could be the first steps for India in this respect to take in order to claim the potential of the reserves that India has? Yeah.
Anybody else? Then I will add a question too. One underlying theme has been that as the world moves towards green energy, this is going to be critical. Minerals will be very critical. And then there is ideas of governments acting or governments and partnerships acting. So why is there skepticism about the efficacy of market forces? After all, we live in a globalized world. There are global markets and they have delivered well in fossil fuels. So why shouldn't they deliver well in critical minerals? The related question is, any more specific ideas of what is it that governments can do apart from having good policy documents in terms of very specific investments or regulations or incentives? So with that, I leave the floor open. Questions are directed to you very specifically.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You
Sir.
have the first.
Well, to answer the gentleman first, can you just introduce yourself, please?
I am Devdas Goswami from International Cooperative.
International Copper, yeah. Okay. So investment, yeah. So private players will come in because profits require, they kind of incline the firms to enter the business space, and that's how free markets work. The kind of investment we're talking is not very large. Our pilot plant, we are not getting it funded by any private equity venture fund or markets. We're doing it on our own with some help from the banks. And the major project, which I talked, $300 million probably, I think it'll be funded by equity. And I can tell you that good ideas and good demand, there is enough money in the world, also in India, to back those projects and initiatives. Capital is not an issue in today's times. It's the ideas which are an issue. Answering the second gentleman, very nice question. We don't collect. Collection is not our job. I think it's it's like, that's a very, very grassroots activity. I think it's best handled dispersed geographically where SMEs are involved and kind of, NGOs and SMEs and a lot of people are involved in collecting. There are a lot of people involved in breaking the battery also, but basically you're taking a hazard and breaking it into 10 hazards. And then it's a recycler where the patent, the technology, the capital, a size of a braking unit is very correctly estimated. I think that was 5 million, but I think it's 1 million for a 10,000 to 30,000 ton braking. But if you look at a typical recycling of metals, it's going to touch 100 million plus. So collection we are not into, we don't intend to get into unless the market forces or the sellers or the governance wants us to do that. So I think there'll be enough and more people breaking and collecting. There'll be very few people actually recycling in a circular manner with zero waste. Answering on the REE side, rare earths, India no doubt has 5th largest rare earths reserve, but they're all light rare earths and not heavy rare earths, number one. Number two, yes, this is a controlled area because you've got uranium and thorium, things which the government doesn't want every private player to get in their hands. I think if the government looks at specific competencies in private sector, gets into a very tight arrangements to hand over the material back, control those investment closely, I think that's possible with the private companies working together with the government. And then you don't have to send those materials out to get done. And that competence can be developed in-house. Yeah, I hope I've answered that question. And on the efficacy of market forces, very, very nice questions, are very macro. Usually businesses would not even get there to understand. But I would say that whenever there is a critical word attached to anything, suddenly everybody, right from companies to governments, take an evasive maneuver to safeguard yourself. And that's what most of the governments are doing. If you look at EU, they are coming up with policies to ensure that the material remains inside through traceability. If you look at US, there is already enactment of laws, which are 2017, you will need 70% of local origin material for battery manufacturing. You look at Korea, they've got 30% of recycled material to be used in batteries. And India is exporting all its black mass. Right now, not much because we are just 1.5 billion mobiles, some of them getting broken, and about 2,000 tons or 2,500 tons a year black mass, but it is going out right now. So what we fear is that the markets tend to act based on the demand and supply, but shortages can sometimes be curtailed through laws and regulations, and that can really deeply impact our security. So therefore, the the supply partners need to be locked in early, and maybe we need to look at long term. And finally, what else? I think there is no shortcut, and very nicely put by Dr. Rajesh Chadha, that there is a short term and you have to look at a long term. And most of these issues which face national or international territories are long-term issues. In the short term, we can, one thing which I wanted to correct, the supply of black mass is not coming in from recycled batteries right now, because there are no EVs in India. There's only R&D. It'll come 10 years later, but every advanced chemistry cell getting made is producing in the first year 20 to 30% waste, second year 10 to 15. And even the best battery manufacturers are at 6 to 8% waste from their gigafactories. And you need to recycle this waste somewhere where the material can be recovered completely and sent back to the same chain. And that technology is available. Whether it will meet the demand of the battery guys exactly what they need, I mean, that you'll need some setting up time, but it's very much there in the country. So the point is, what else can we do in the long term? I think long term, we will have to develop the capability of doing some of these missing gaps in our technology, whether it is in exploration technology, which you can tie up with some of your good partners who have been into sources are usually very good at the exploration, because those who have those mineral deposits. And second is to really, really invest into R&D in joint with, to ensure it all gets commercialized and doesn't land up as a paper. So you have to have private sector involvement with some of your academia to ensure that as soon as an idea reaches a 30, 40, 50% level, a commercial person is involved to see how we can, whether it is commercial viable or not, and how we can do it. I mean, those partnerships are missing, and that's precisely what, as a company, we want to intend with our 100 scientist lab, which we are putting up to, and we invite all the brains to who can work on batteries or battery waste or getting the material out from these wastes. I think that will be the long-term plan. And on the government level, probably some kind of a joint working group on research areas between India's group and some of your partner groups, so that there is, India is a great market. It's a big market. We've got people who are technically sound. We've got a high growth, and therefore every country which has technology wants to invest into India. And I'm sure you will find a lot of these technology transfers.
I think somebody had asked a question on informal labor and G20. So informal labor is very unique to emerging economies. And this is not just in the automobile sector. I'm talking all sectors. Coal, about 80% of your workforce is informal. At a labor force level, particular 85% of your economy is informal. So, and this is India, this is Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, Colombia, all of them suffer from this. So there's not much that can be done about it at G20. What you can do about it is more on how you look at domestic reskilling, upskilling, and green skilling programs that can actually effectively target some of these sectors. What we will end up seeing going forward is targeted skilling programs or targeted support for MSME clusters that manufacture auto components, because that is something that's extremely essential when we think of transition away from electric vehicles, from ICE to electric vehicles. But even without the larger electric vehicles narrative, just from a supply chain perspective, we have to look at MSMEs. That was point number one. Can I make one more point if I have time? Thank you. My second point was, sir, on the market forces point that you mentioned. I agree with you. At some level, we should let market forces decide. But right now, the problem that's happening is there are only a handful of companies that have the technology and that are currently in the mining sector. A lot of them demonstrate very rent-seeking behaviors. And unfortunately or fortunately, it may go ahead and create a problem. Somebody asked me whether critical minerals is going to be the new oil. And I was like, let's not take that analogy too far. We can do some things today that can stop critical minerals becoming the new oil. And that's what we should move towards, which is why, as Bhuvan pointed out, the strategic alliances, both at a bilateral and at a multilateral level, will help. What Professor Chadha said about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, which I believe should come from the government in terms of a strategy. What can the government do apart from policy documents? I think put in some more money, take away some of the put in initial seed capital for some of the companies, for domestic manufacturing companies. PLI is a great example. I still don't think the seed capital for PLI is enough, but that is actually step one. Just take away some of the initial risk and then let the companies go ahead. Thank you.
A couple of quick remarks. I think there was a discussion on the social aspects, that why do some mining companies are not able to operate because of some restrictions. That is what was the question. I think that's a very important question, because I said it in the beginning that what we are working on are two aspects. Since I'm an economist, so positive economics, that is all that I was discussing, but at the same time we have given enough attention to normative economics. And if you wish to read our paper on Jharkhand, it is CSAP, Sustainable Mining Attractiveness Index, which talks about multiple pillars and indicators within those pillars. So the first step obviously is that post-lease clearances have to be taken in their stride, and that the final clearance, before it is given, the company has to have the okay from the local communities, and the local administrators should be fully responsible to see to it that externalities are fully compensated for. So we are now working on, and it's not Jharkhand, it's Jharkhand districts. We are now working on 12 states, all the districts which have mining interests. How can sustainable mining attractiveness index emerge? That's my point number one. Point two, recycling is absolutely important. I alluded to our recent op-ed on Mine the Gap but I could hear from first Swati that it's going to be around 10%, but the leftover is 90%. And I mean, whether we give incentives through PLI, which I have enough debate, not in favor, but it is important that we must give exploration its chance. We have zero or very little exploration expenditure from junior explorers who are not coming to India because there are no incentives. He may spend billions, but at the end of the day may not win the auction. And many of the auctions, you can read our auctions paper, have happened, but actual mining has not yet started. So there are multiple complexities that need to be, hope I have answered 2 or 3 points that.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. So first of all, Dr. Chadha, I have noted down the references and I'll read through them with keen interest. So, and I'll, I think, come back to you with questions and all. But other than that, I wanted to take up 2 points here, which weren't really directed at me, but I just wanted to give my 2 cents on it. So first was the question raised by the gentleman from World Copper Association, and sort of marrying it to, sir, the point that you had made, is about how do you get investment? How do you get private industry to invest? So in that sort of light, I wanted to discuss a very interesting point with the audience here. So a decade back, there was a lot of interest in this RE investments that are being made, and there was a lot of discussion around power evacuation systems. How do you get this RE, which is produced in one corner of the country, to the demand that is coming up in all the load centers? Can we think of similar sort of policy paradigms in the case of CRMs? And here, if I'm looking at it from the waste management perspective, and Rajasthan has taken a lead on it. So I don't know if many of you are aware. So they are coming up with a e-waste processing zone. They have identified a parcel of land. So they are sort of investing in a CRM evacuation system, if you will call it that. So they set up the infrastructure. Private individuals come and set up their estates or their things there. You have this ecosystem that is developed, and there are obviously synergies that recyclers can learn from each other, their efficiencies improve. So that is the policy sort of support that I believe needs to be lent to this sector. The second thing is, again, from the informal sector side, and I will sort of view it from the recycling lens. I totally agree with Swati. This is more of a global South problem. Maybe the G20 would not be very interested in this. But from the recycling side, if you look at the informal sector, they are very well part of the ecosystem in terms of efficiencies with respect to collection, transportation system. The formal processes would need their support. But how do you marry them, I would say, favorably into the ecosystem is where the question is. So government, I would say, has done a bit of flip-flop with respect to this idea of PROs, producer responsibility organizations, that are sort of the middle tier layers who are sort of conversing with both the OEMs who have to sort of pay for the recycling, as well as the small scale recyclers who would do the recycling. But PROs as a concept, I feel, are somehow losing their importance. So I feel that the question about how to get informal workers, informal organizations woven into the ecosystem, maybe the question needs to start with making PROs more relevant to recent times, and how do you give more, I would say, support and activities and accountability to them. So that is where it's at. Thank you.
Amrita, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Mr. Shankar. The way you conduct business is impressive. I know we completely overshot our time, but what I learned in the process is it is a waste collection, which we called all the way happening at the grassroots, somebody going, it's all the way to geopolitics, how to manage, Uganda, Congo, it's a range of issues. It could overwhelm, but I think the history taught us there are always ways out in terms of my optimism is we will not get stuck with the metal or with the mineral or with one process, with one technology. So I end with optimism of we'll find a way, not to jugaad technology, we only do it, but certainly the way, I never understand we have such a sophisticated processing facility. I'm so proud we have it. So that's second point is, from the foundation perspective, looks like we have a lot more work to do. The session is not the end. Looks like it's a beginning for impressive work we need to do. Thank you.
So would you like to come in with any comments? You have the last word.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, all right, perfect. So it's been a really interesting session to attend, and also really happy to know about such an advanced recycling facility. Just taking 30 seconds to wrap up, touching on something that Swati said about critical minerals becoming the new oil. So that is something that should never happen, and it's also something that probably will not happen. The main reason is that when there is a breakdown of the oil supply chain, we stop driving cars immediately. Whereas if there is a disruption in the critical mineral supply chain, it will take 5 to 7 years at least for that disruption to show up in the EVs that we are driving. So we don't stop driving the EVs that we are driving now just because there is a disruption in the critical mineral supply chain. What we have to really focus on is that we need to minimize these disruptions so that 5 to 7 years later, we don't encounter problems. But at the same time, there is clearly this advantage with critical minerals that really doesn't exist with oil and gas. When there is a disruption of oil and gas supply, it's the end at that very moment for everything that runs on oil and gas. So that's, I think, quite the edge that we have with clean energy technologies.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a note of optimism. So the risks behind the green transition are probably milder compared to the ones we've been through in the fossil fuel economy. Thank you.
On behalf of TERI and WSDA Secretariat, I would like to extend a warm gratitude to our panelists who have taken out their valuable time and have joined us from different parts of the India and world and made this event and this panel discussion a success. I'm very thankful to Mr. Ajay Shankar sir for moderating the session. And my special thanks to all the delegates who have joined us and made this event possible. From WSTS team, I request all of you to join us for another session, which is on the accelerating integrated recycling infrastructure in India. The session will start at 2 p.m. after lunch. I request to all of you to join there and hope to see you there. Have a great WSTS. Thank you, everyone.